So, if you have a life and you weren't able to just stay connected to Twitter all day and keep hitting refresh, and if you fit that description, God bless you. You have a much better day than we have had so far. Here's what's happened. Reports came out a few hours ago. Big Ten planning to play conference games only. You know I don't like using notes on the show, but I had to write all this down. Now, no schedule has been released, so there figures to be a revised schedule. Maybe they play 8 games. It seems like they want to play a 10-game conference schedule. Don't know when that schedule would be released. Among the perceived casualties here, Ohio State, Oregon, gone. Washington, Michigan, gone. Iowa State, gone. That Wisconsin-Notre Dame game, they've already talked about rescheduling that one, gone. Penn State, Virginia Tech, gone. I don't need to go down the entire list. You understand. Now, the SEC and the Big 12, it sounds like, and Brandon Marcello's done some really good reporting on this today, and some other of our 24/7 sports folks from all across the country have, and we'll give them shout-outs in due time, but it sounds like the SEC, at least as a league, was kind of taken by surprise that the Big Ten went ahead with this announcement today. See, there's a difference in knowing that the discussions are going on and releasing the announcement. It sounds like pretty much everyone was taken off guard and sort of on their heels when the announcement was made, which is not necessarily surprising to me, but noteworthy nonetheless. Brett McMurphy at Stadium reports that the ACC is probably heavily leaning towards going this route. No official announcement yet. And again, Brandon Marcello, if you want the latest up-to-date fact-based reporting on this, I would just follow his Twitter account. The guy's been a step ahead of virtually every curveball that's been thrown at us, to use a different sports analogy here. Chip Brown over at Horns 24/7 has some really good stuff out in the last couple of hours about the Big 12 side of things. So there's there's not a lot of really good reporting going on. There's some good reporting going on, and then there's a lot of, just the seals that clap in unison and pretty much regurgitate what the few out there are reporting. It's the 595 rule we've talked about here. So there is no real authority on this, and with that, let's dive in. My takeaways, this is going to be very free-flowing. The first thing I thought when I saw this is G5s are screwed. FCS programs could very well be screwed here. This is certainly not to take a shot. This is no day to take a shot at anyone, but we have long maintained on this program that one of the main reasons that we don't support auto bids of any kind in a playoff or G5 is because we didn't feel like they played the same sport as their Power 5 counterparts. And the perfect example is on display here. If you need to lean on a pillar in order to support your very existence, you're not equal to that pillar. So this is not necessarily the day that I want to spend 10 minutes on that subject, but it's a perfect case study. You think about the revenue that not only is nice to get, but is depended on for programs like Bowling Green, for programs like Louisiana Monroe, but even programs like Memphis, Central Florida. What happens there? I don't know. I have no clue what happens there. Now, I'll tell you one program that I saw a lot of people resort to talking about that I don't think is in trouble is Notre Dame. And Notre Dame will get things figured out. Don't worry about Notre Dame. Now, here's some of the questions that I have, some of the questions that I looked at my inbox and I saw you guys asking. We may be a little short on answers tonight, but see, what we're not going to do that you can have plenty of, again, if you just peruse Twitter, is just guess all over the place. Well, if I have no clue, I'll tell you I have no clue. Do we assume that there is uniformity in the decision-making process? I think up until today, a lot of people wanted to somewhat willfully, ignorantly believe that there was uniformity across the Power 5 landscape, and you wanted to believe that there was this Zoom powwow going on every morning where all the conference commissioners and athletic directors and presidents and high-level executives, they were all just meeting in secret. And you guys doing anything today? You guys making a move today? No. Okay. Scout's honor, no one's making a move today. Yeah, well, that got shattered into a million pieces like a Stone Cold Steve Austin entrance because it looks like there were conversations, according to Chip Brown's report that I read a little while ago, there were conversations between the Big 12 and the Big 10 this morning. It's like they walked into the lobby and saw each other over at the breakfast table this morning, and not a word was spoken about, oh, by the way, we got an announcement coming today. No one knew it. So what does that mean? Our Brandon Marcello, who has done some great reporting on this, and my money is on continuing to do great reporting on this, he has long called for one thing that I don't support, and that's college football playoff expansion. But one thing that he has called for that has had my attention for a while, and I probably do support, is a central authority figure in college football, or, as you may know them, czars. Who would it be? Who would decide that? I don't know. But it is a 5-alarm cluster right now when you don't even have the commissioners and leadership of one Power 5 conference so much as disseminating to the other Power 5 conferences, heads up, in 30 minutes, just give me a 30-minute heads up. We're going to make a move. We're going to make an announcement. So there is no uniformity. There is no decision-making and I'm going to let you know and I'm going to let you know. That's out of here. So with that in mind, we asked this. It was assumed, I was doing a hit with Mark Ryan on ESPN Upstate today, pretty much as this news was breaking. And one of the things we talked about that I'm going to be bold enough to tell you I don't have a clue on right now is, number one, will every Power 5 conference follow suit? I think the general consensus now is it's not a matter of if, but when that happens, but it's not a foregone conclusion quite yet. If they don't, then what happens to out-of-conference scheduling and whatnot? Now, if they do, we understand no one's playing any out-of-conference games. I don't know that everyone necessarily has crossed the bridge publicly or behind the scenes to just deciding, forget about it, we're going out-of-conference only. And reading between the lines, it sounds like there was some moderate to severe aggravation in the conference offices of maybe the SEC, Big 12, et cetera, that this move was made because they don't want to punt quite yet on the concept of playing out-of-conference games. And then you think, I saw this idea floated around a little bit. I told some of our guys I was thinking the same thing earlier today. You think about conferences like the SEC and the ACC that geographically overlap each other already, and you obviously have a number of out-of-conference tie-ins, whether it be Georgia, Georgia Tech, South Carolina, Clemson, Florida, Florida State, et cetera. You already have a lot of annual rivalry games there anyway. You wonder, if you could standardize the health guidelines between conferences, who's to say that the ACC and the SEC don't say, well, you know what? If everyone wants to play a couple of out-of-conference games and the overall landscape allows us to do that later in the year, well, are you free tomorrow? I'm free tomorrow. You got 14? I got 14. 3 or 4 of ours are already hooked up, so yeah, let's see what we can do. I don't know that that's a bridge that's necessarily been burned. I think that the lighter fluid is already in place and the matches have been purchased. I don't think that the bridges have been burned yet. Now, as for the Big Ten's schedule, and theoretically, if everyone else makes this move, other conferences' schedules, I don't know how this is handled. I don't know if it's a mess and it looks like, death by 100 baseball bat swings, or if just one announcement's made and here's our conference schedule. But it does at least, if this is going to go off without a hitch, it does at least give you some ray of sunshine of knowing, well, everyone loves the NFL schedule release date. Maybe we'll have a college football conference schedule release date. It's got to happen sometime. They got to get figured out first, but it's got to happen sometime. But here's what I was talking to Colin about a little while ago. Now, if you're in the camp that believes, oh, we're not going to play football, then this is irrelevant. If you're in the camp that believes we're going to play it, but it's definitely going to be delayed, this also may be irrelevant. But if there's one thing that you can take away from these announcements, and this was the first but won't be the last, if there's one thing you can take away from that announcement, if you woke up this morning and you had taken a lot of this silence over the last few days to mean that everyone was kind of quietly shifting their attention to the spring, well, this shreds that into a million pieces. Pretty obvious people's focus is on the fall and having a fall football season. Whether that happens or not, that's another discussion for another show. But here's what it does. What it does is it also puts on the table the question of when do you start? And I think when you go with an 8 or 10 game schedule, the goal has to be start that thing as soon as you can. It's obvious in listening to some of the language out of the Big Ten today. They want to start it as early as they can. In this industry, if we're stacking a show, we have this concept called the accordion concept. And basically what it is if we're stacking an hour-long show, we know where the commercial breaks are, we know what our runtime is, we want to put a topic at the very back end of an hour that we could shrink to 5 minutes if we wanted to, or we could expand it to 15 minutes, i.e. the accordion. It expands, it contracts. I'll tell you who's a good accordion player is Bruce Hornsby. Tears it up on piano, but he knows accordion too. The season could very well be an accordion season if you can start it early enough. If you got a 10-week season or a 9 or an 8-week season and you start it in early September, well, then you give yourself so much wiggle room if you do have a delay, if you do have a stoppage, if you do have to make an unforeseen move. But if you start it and you have X number of dates to get in X number of games, and the games and the X's really match, then you don't have much wiggle room. So that was what a majority of people's initial reactions consisted of today. But here was mine. Everyone's thinking that. I'm thinking that too. But what I thought about is, let's say we get the season off the ground. Anytime someone's flown for the first time, or maybe you've flown for 100 times, but you're flying in severe weather for the first time, you're white knuckling it, and then here we go off down the runway, and you're just praying, and even though the math doesn't add up, you think there's no better than a 50-50 chance we even get this thing off the ground. But then it gets off the ground, and it's shaky, and it's turbulent, but finally you get above that cloud deck, and things smooth out, and you know, okay, we've at least got it off the ground. If we get the college football season off the ground, and we start speculating on things other than, hey, are we going to be able to play? And we start talking about actual football matters. Does anyone have the slightest clue how the college football playoff is going to be handled this year? More specifically, does anyone among us have the slightest clue how you're going to determine ratings if people are playing unbalanced schedules? Do any of you have any concept of how much more difficult it's going to be to determine something like a strength of schedule? Take Oregon, for example. You know, the Oregon Ducks were going to play Ryan Day's Ohio State Buckeyes. You see him here if you're watching the YouTube live feed in week 2. And no matter how soft you thought the Pac-12 conference schedule was going to be that Oregon may play this year, I'm spitballing here, even if you thought that that conference schedule was Charmin soft, you were going to be able to have that data point of Ohio State. And no matter how much you criticized, it could be Clemson and Notre Dame too. No matter how much you criticized Clemson's conference schedule, they were going to have that data point against Notre Dame. And so we don't have those anymore. In all likelihood, especially with the Ohio State-Oregon example, how do you determine strength of schedule? A lot of times, conferences are bubbles, and rarely do teams exit their bubbles, but there is some overlap. And so you do have some overlapping of conferences where you can get some kind of comparative analysis. You don't have any of that. If things shake out the way it looks like they're trending, you don't have any of that. So now more than ever, I think, is a time to implement what I have long thought should be implemented anyway in the college football playoff selection and rating process. There are people who jumped the shark tenfold a while back when people started talking gambling in a mainstream fashion. Everyone wanted to have the hottest take on gambling. And so some people jumped 10 steps too far and said, well, hey, why don't we just use Las Vegas point spread projections in the college football playoff rankings process? Well, the answer, friend, is because that would be stupid, and it would forego the entire concept of football games and results on the field mattering. It's not Xbox, it's real life. We've been doing simulations right now, but we're doing simulations to pass the time because we don't have real games. If you have real games, then you're not doing simulations. That's not how Vegas should ever be incorporated into the college football playoff selection process. Here's where they always have had a fit, and where I've always had a big beef. When strength of schedule is determined in this sport, it is a very, for lack of a better term, a bastardized way of determining pure strength of schedule. I was talking with someone very dialed in on the Las Vegas odds-making side of things earlier today, and the basic idea was anytime that you could take a raw Vegas power rating concept and insert it into a ratings process or a rankings process, it's better for it. Because by default, you know that the only bias, everyone's always worried about bias, the only bias that is included in a pure Vegas odds maker style rating of a team is getting it right. They can't afford to be wrong. Quite literally, their livelihoods depend on it. And here's where it really comes into play. Where it comes into play is, I'm just going to use teams out of the blue here. We could have North Carolina this year. You take away Central Florida on their schedule, you took away Auburn on their schedule, those were going to be two major data points. North Carolina doesn't play Clemson in the regular season. UNC, who a lot of people are high on to varying degrees, UNC could run the slate undefeated, and you could be sitting there and you could be asking yourself, where do we rank them? Because you could have a one-loss team in, let's say, the Big Ten, I call it the Big Ten East, or you could have a one-loss team in the SEC West, and you could try and be figuring out strength of schedule, and by default, since everyone has to play everyone else, like I could take a conference full of NFL teams, and not all of them would be undefeated. It would certainly be the strongest conference in the world, but without cross-pollination of conference schedules, you have no real way of knowing. And I'm not saying that using Vegas ratings to determine a strength of schedule is foolproof, but I do trust that process a whole heck of a lot more than just putting people in a room and just trusting that their eyeballs can tell me how good this team is, and this team is that I've played, and they're going off more than just, well, how many points have they scored per game? What's their record? All that's heavily impacted, obviously, in the incestuous nature, again, for lack of a better term, it's the fact that you're just playing the same teams over and over again. So the strength of schedule is something that I'd really love to see them take a look at. Everyone else is going down the road of let's expand the playoff this year. And that's all well and good. You know how against it I am. But if the season's going to be a wash as it relates to normalcy, then fine. Run your experiment. I get the sneaking suspicion that the outcome may be to the detriment of what your long-term wishes are. I guess we'll have more time to talk about that later. But if you want to go auto bids this year, if you want to try your precious 8-team playoff this year, I don't care. Throw an auto bid to the English Premier League. Why not? You want to give auto bids to everyone else? Try it this year. Just make sure you watch the first round of aforementioned playoff. But in conclusion, just remember, there aren't a whole lot of answers right now. And remember the 595 rule. Everyone's talking out there. A lot of folks have opinion. Very few facts. In fact, even in decision-making positions, sometimes it's pretty disgusting to see how unwilling decision makers are to take a stand on something. Now, I'm not telling you everyone needed to take a stand today. What I am telling you is it's pretty ridiculous that one domino falling precipitates 15 more dominoes falling. What does that tell you? There wasn't any new COVID-19 data released today. There wasn't some eye-opening presentation that was given to someone. There wasn't this platter full of new facts that came out. Everyone's waiting on everyone else to do something. The 95% are followers in our business and in that business. They're just waiting. They're petrified to be criticized. And so they don't want to make a move. The 5% are reporting fact. And the 5% on their side of the fence are the ones that are really sacking up enough to make a decision. So just because you see a tidal wave this way or a tidal wave that way, it doesn't mean that this entire army of people have come across some new data or new information. It means that a couple of people have come across new information, or a couple of people made decisions, and then everyone else said, all right, hitch up the wagon, time to follow. So that's where we are right now. No answers. No answers. I do strongly pray that all of a sudden you and I wake up over the span of the next 2 weeks and things have just drastically taken a turn for the better. I know right now predictions are that things are going to be hellish until the end of time, but crazier things have happened. So I don't know, maybe we wake up a couple of weeks from now and things look much better than they do right now. What a fantasy world that would be, huh? Dare I say, we'd love for things to improve enough for conferences to rethink this decision. That sounds like a fairy tale at this point.